Hello retro fans, welcome to another episode of C64 Customs, and this week I have a couple of different topics. Initially I was looking forward to working on my ARM2 SID tests again, but I haven't made that much progress over the week because I was busy with a couple of other things like owning money and something like this. And therefore I have to postpone this. But for this week's episode I have prepared a couple of things, and we're going to talk about the most recent update for the Ultimate64, and I have received a couple of things which I want to, well, kind of briefly introduce to, and talking about my next, well, let's say, projects. So I'm really keen in checking what happens with the Ultimate64 with the new firmware, and we're going to cover a couple of those new features. So, as I said, I have received a couple of new new things, and let's start with the very first one. I have ordered a very new Easy Flash 3 with the most recent or the most actual PCB design, and I have received this from Robert from Forum64, and he was so kind to send me an additional package, and this looks like this, and it's basically the very same Easy Flash 3 but as an assembly kit. And I'm really looking forward to assemble this because, as you can see, it is very tiny SMD stuff here, and I think this is really going to challenge my soldering skills a little bit, and I'm really interested to see whether I can handle this. And well, basically, thank you very much, Robert, for this. I'm very impressed. And since we talk about SMD soldering already, I have received another package, and this came from Hans from our, let's say, Twitter retro community. And you may remember that I had one episode where I was showing or I was presenting an HDMI conversion for the C64. And this is going to be the very same thing. You may remember that there were two PCBs. One is going to be the replacement for the modulator, and one is some kind of adapter for the VIC socket, which contains some electronics as well. And here I have to solder some SMD parts. I mean, the whole thing is almost SMD except for the connectors perhaps. But as you can see, it is some very tiny stuff as well, so it's going to be as challenging as soldering the Easy Flash 3. And I'm really keen on working on this one, but I have to finish a couple of other things first. And I have received all the parts for this adapter as well, and there are some additional things like sockets and cable connectors and the cable itself, so there's a lot of things to do with this project. And then I have received cables, small, very small cables, and those cables are used to connect the SID-FX to the Keyman project I have introduced already as well. And I was looking for the right type of connector, and as you can see, I failed ordering the correct one, which is indeed a bit strange because I measured them, and perhaps they sent me some wrong sockets, some wrong connectors. I really have to check my order. That's very sad. I was really looking forward to get those cables, and I had some help from Hans as well as from John from our Twitter retro community. they pointed me in the right direction, but this is actually not the correct type. Oh, it's a little bit out of focus, but I mean, it's obvious it's too small. And it's really strange because it's supposed to be the correct format, but this is available in different dimensions. And I'm really surprised that this isn't working the way I have expected this. So I have to order some new cables, and very, very unfortunately I can't finish this project. So I'm not even sure what they sent me at all, because this won't fit together either. So this is indeed a very, very strange thing. Oh, okay, so with some fiddling it fits, but as you can see, this is way too small. Well, shit happens. And then some status. I was working on an NES HDMI conversion, and it's basically not that much of a big deal. I was just removing 2 ICs, and I hope the other one is still somewhere here on my desk, and I just had to add some sockets to it, and then I will ship this back, and hopefully this is going to work. And but last but not least, you may remember I have worked on connection cable between the Mssiah and a C64, and I was, well, let's say, quite successfully with printing this type of connectors and using DuPont cables to connect the keyman to the C64, but I had to have some learning. And the issue is that basically this has worked very fine, and I was quite impressed that my 3D printer is able to print such, let's say, tiny things. And as I said, everything was working fine until I started to connect, to disconnect, switch the cable, switch ports and all that stuff. And suddenly the cable stopped working. And the reason is quite simple. After I have found it, I mean, it took me a couple of attempts to find the root cause for this problem. And the issue is that the Mssiah, as well as the Ultimate64, as well as the MK2, MK1 boards, for example, they use a kind of a standard pin header. And the original C64 board is using some, let's say, different pin header. And on the C64, the pins are slightly bigger than on the parts I have mentioned previously. And if you force the cable onto a C64 board, then the connectors of those DuPont cables are kind of, well, let's say, getting wider. And that's probably a little bit tricky to see here right now, but I may just show you what I'm talking about. So basically it looks like this. You have some very small metal part inside those DuPont connectors, and this is more or less some kind of folded metal sheet, very thin metal sheet. And as you can see, it is really just some kind of square shaped or whatever sheet, and there are some very tiny spring kind of mechanism inside this little connector, and the C64 pin header widens this connector and especially the small spring here. And if you try to put this back onto a smaller pin, for example, then the spring is already, let's say, not in its original location and original position, and you do not have a reliable contact. And since the C64 keyboard is working like a, let's say, a matrix, and if you miss some contacts every now and then you will have the effect that some of the keys of the C64 aren't working anymore. And I thought initially this is a problem of the Mssiah because the Mssiah can be assembled with two different kind of matrix converter ICs, and they are, well, nowadays a little bit hard to get, and I was using the, I think, MT200 22103 type IC, and the Mssiah was originally designed for the MT8808, I think, if I'm not wrong right now. And you can change the configuration and it should work with both of those ICs. But I thought perhaps this is going to be the problem of my Mssiah connection, whatever thingy, until I figured out that if I just started to bend the connector or the connection a little bit and hold it in a certain position, everything was working fine. So long chatting with not that much information, I guess. I started to renew this whole project, and I have printed a new connector, and this time I'm using a different type of material. So the blue material, it's not really related to the color, but for this example it works quite fine. It's the so-called PLA material, and PLA is, let's say, quite easy to print, and it's a very, well, let's say, forgivable material. And the issue with PLA is that the material itself tends to be a bit brittle, so it kind of it breaks very easily, especially if you have very tiny parts like those, let's say, tongs or whatever you want to call this here. And so for the next approach, I decided to print this in a PETG, and PETG is kind of comparable to PLA. It is not as easy to print as PLA, but still easier than other materials. And PETG has, let's say, more flex, and it is less brittle. And therefore, those little tongs, those little parts here are more, let's say, reliable. And I already tested this with just a few cables, whether I get them into the plug, which is a little bit tricky because it is indeed very tiny. There's not that much space, and those DuPont cables, they have some kind of let's say, mechanical tolerances as well. But it is able, I can get those into this connector. And now this little tongue, whatever you want to call it, I don't know, spring, whatever, holding mechanism, kind of snaps into this DuPont metal connector part on the top of it, and holds the cable into its position. Very nice. So, and as a next thing, I have to assemble the whole cable, and then I have to mark it, so a C64 side and a Mssiah side, so that I'm not going to switch the sides again, and then hopefully everything is working fine. So this part is available on Thingiverse as well. I will put a link in the description section. I have made this available for everybody who is interested in to print C64 connectors. So anyway, so much about the stuff that's going on. I already mentioned that I'm working on the ARM2SID testing video, whatever, comparison. And as you can see, I have installed this on my Ultimate64, and I run already a couple of tests with it, and so far I'm very happy with the ARM2SID itself. That's really fine. I still have a couple of issues, or some issues, on Ultimate64, so right now we are not able to unleash the full potential of the ARM2SID on the Ultimate64, but hopefully this is going to change. So then let's talk about the second, let's say, main topic of this episode, and this is basically the new firmware update of the Ultimate64. We have seen an update, I think a few weeks ago or something like this, and I was honestly a little bit confused because the update was kind of I don't know, I wouldn't call it disappointing, but I had expected a couple of more things to be implemented, and I was looking forward to some more, let's say, compatibility issue solving, whatever, bug fixing implementations. But anyway, now we have a new firmware version, and I already have updated my Ultimate64 because I was going to check a couple of things in preparation of this video, and one of the probably the most coolest feature or the most outstanding feature is something I'm going to present to you right now, and this is basically looking like this. So I'm running the Cultron demo on the Ultimate64, and on the right hand bottom side you can see the HDMI capture of the output of the Ultimate64, and on the left hand side you can see the so-called U64 streamer application, which is running in Windows right now, and this is receiving the video, the VIC output from the Ultimate64 via network cable. So the most recent update of the Ultimate64 enables us to stream video and audio data to capable devices. And as a kind of example, or well, let's say have a start with it, application U64 Streamer is available in the very first beta version, and it works very fine so far. There's actually one flaw I couldn't address so far. This is basically I'm able to receive the video signal but not the audio signal, but we can stream the audio signal as well. It's called SID streaming. But it looks like that the U64 Streamer application is actually not able to receive both streams, and therefore we do not have the audio on this streaming application. And the next thing I'm kind of well, working on is perhaps a little bit too broad, but I was testing whether I'm able to use a VLC video player, for example, to receive this video stream. I think I need to fiddle around with a couple of settings, because the Ultimate64 is able to stream to a certain device, or is able to do some, let's say, broadcast streaming. And basically, at least my expectation is that we should be able to receive this with a standard IP video device, for example, so that we are not bound to use one single app. But that's probably something I really have to figure out, and as I mentioned, I still have no sound over this VIC streaming, which is kind of more normal because it's a big streaming, but if we want to use this to stream our Ultimate64, whatever gameplay or something like this, to a different device, then we may want to have some sound there as well. And you may ask, what's going to be the purpose of this feature? And basically, especially for, let's say, a streamer and video creator, it is very interesting. Actually, I'm using an HDMI capture card to convert the HDMI signal of the Ultimate64 into some digital video material, which has which then is recorded and transformed and whatever you do with this video signal. And if this HDMI let's move back a bit. If this VIC/SID streaming over the network is working, then you do not need an HDMI capture device anymore, because you can record this video signal directly. And we may see some troubles getting this into OBS, for example, or other streaming/video recording application, but I really hope and I think we will see a technical solution for this very soon. I really hope so, that this time we're going to get something that is more common. So I was a little bit disappointed about the network integration or the network support of the Ultimate64, because it is not compatible to the RR-Link, let's call it standard, and therefore a lot of applications which are working for the Turbo Chameleon 64, including the RRNet adapter, for example, or with a standalone RRNet adapter, aren't working on the Ultimate64. And I think I'm not the only one who was and still is a bit disappointed about this. So hopefully we are going to see some kind of IP video compatible stream out of the Ultimate64, so that we can record this directly with OBS, for example, and I can use the video signal without additional converting it. So anyway, what's next? What have we seen as improvement on the Ultimate64 firmware? There is a list of changes, a list of well, let's say bug fixes or improvements, and I had one window capture prepared, but I lost it by whatever reason. But here we go in a short moment. And here it is. So let's make this a little bit bigger. So on the Ultimate64 page, we can see what kind of differences we have to the previous release, which I have mentioned was available just a few weeks ago. And as we can see, the most advanced features or the top features are real-time streaming video data over Ethernet, real-time streaming audio data over Ethernet, and read more about streams here. Data streams documentation, which is basically this page that explains how this whole thing is going to work, how we have to set up this, to which addresses we have to stream this, and how we can capture this basically. And at the end of this page we have a link to this TSBU64 streamer. That's the application I was just presenting a few minutes ago. And if you just walk yourself through the steps here, you have this video on your screen in basically no time. And the cool thing is that if you go to broadcast mode, for example, if you just stream this to your router and then you just hope that the router is distributing this over the network, then you can receive the stream on multiple devices as well. And this is indeed a very cool thing if you want to have some, let's say, party mode or something like this, and if you want to have other people participate in your gaming whatever experience. And I can admit that this is really almost lag free. So the video signal is streamed as fast as you can see this on your let's say TFT device, for example. So I guess, I assume, I haven't tested it yet, we will have no more than 1 or 2 frames lag, and this is basically more an issue of your network configuration and not really of the Ultimate64. But coming back to the update list, we see that we have some additional commands over TCP to enable, disable the stream, so we can do this from the outside as well. We do not have to use the Ultimate64 menu. I'm sorry for this. And then we have some additional improvements, and one is going to be very interesting for the ARM2 SID. Added DE00 and DF00 ranges as possible options for SID socket decodes. I have tested this briefly. I wasn't able to get this to work out of the box, so I may have to spend a little bit more time. And the background of this is that if you want to use the ARM2 SID in FM synthesis mode, you are required to have not only DF00, you need DF20 as well in order to get this working. And this wasn't working on the Ultimate64, but as I said, it wasn't working out of the box with the update either. So I may have to spend some time and to figure out how this is going to work. Printer emulation now supports color. That's a very cool thing if you are into printing documents out of GEOS, for example. And printing colors is a very interesting thing to you. Then we see some improvements to the wig. We see some sprite collision timing solved, sprite background collision problem solved. This is, I think, something that was causing issues in River Raid, for example, the game. And Turrican 3 was showing some issues as well. And I think some of the other sprite improvements things are more meant for demos or something like this. And as you can see, we have some more implementation of opcodes and illegible opcodes. And this is going to address a couple of other programs which aren't working with previous versions as well. We have some improvements to the SID, so to the ADSR envelope generator, and more realistic values for SID filter resonances. That's something I really need to test. Added volume control for the SID digis. This is kind of a digi boost, and a low pass boost in SID mixer, maybe to get the bass a little bit better, or really have to check what's going to be the improvement for this. Improvement for the SID player. Built-in SID player now supports Muse files, and added support for toggling screen on off in SID player with S key. Song length in SID headers, fixed SID model selection for SID FX boards, and various other bug fixes, and some other things here as well. So in my opinion, this update is really a major step forward, and I'm really happy that we see so much progress for the Ultimate64. And I think this is really going to be a very cool thing if the compatibility is going to be better and better with every firmware. So last but not least, one thing I'm really interested in to see with the new firmware is whether Messiah is working, because we failed with this one during the last firmware updates, during the last tests, and therefore I really want to check if this is now a bit better. And in order to do so, we have to power off the C64 so that we can install our cartridge. And I think now perhaps we are not going to need joystick or something like this. It should work like this. And as far as I remember, I think monosynth was crashing when we tried to leave it. So let's see whether we can jump into it, and then we may go to exit, no, to quit. Are you sure? Yes. And yes, it is working. So the next thing was sequencer that crashed on exit. But I think for this we need a mouse or at least a joystick, because we are not able to get to the menu without a joystick. I think there was a key combination where we could kind of fake input the mouse. So that's probably nothing we can emulate right now. Or I can find my oh, get a mouse. That's perhaps easier. I was looking for my nunchuck adapter. It's on my desk. Okay, anyway. But I think mouse isn't working out of the box. So we may have to reboot. Nope, that was the wrong key. So let's try a normal reset. Now let's jump into sequencer again and see if this is working. So my mouse is still not working, and I think the reason for this is that we have to set pedal override to yes. So, and now the mouse is working as well, and now we can quickly load the demo sound just to see if we can hear something. Now this is working fine, and if we're going to quit, yes, perfect. So I'm really happy that Mssiah is working on the Ultimate64. This is indeed a huge step forward, because basically I have to admit, the main idea for getting the Ultimate64 was to use it for my music projects, because my expectation is that we will get, let's say, the best sound quality possible for C64 out of the Ultimate64, because it is simply lacking all the original ICs, which are very noisy. And if we talk about sound synthesis using the monosynth, for example, or the other modules of Mssiah, it is not really required to have a 100% accurate SID emulation, because you fine-tune your sounds as long as you still think there is some room for improvement. And whether this sounds on a original SID the very same or not doesn't matter, because it is kind of a standalone synthesizer. And therefore it is really nice that this is working now. So basically I think this is going to be enough talking about the Ultimate64 firmware update. I think it was kind of a very dense and very brief introduction of some of the new features and improvements, but I think this is basically really just an overview, and I'm going to test a couple of those new features, like the streaming, for example, and the improvements we see in the SID addresses, for example. And then I will provide an update about this topic as well. And as a very last thing, I like to talk about something that you may have recognized in my last video. And I had some issues with DAP card, and basically not with the DAP card itself as a physical piece or something like this, but I was testing whether the ARM2 SID is able to reproduce the sound of the DAP card. And perhaps I had used some lengthy examples, so maybe I had let run the songs a bit too long. And suddenly I recognized, just by kind of a coincidence or something like this, that I had 2 copyright IDs on my video. And the strange thing is, I guess it's a YouTube thing or something like this, I don't know. You get no info about this. So it was really just, I kind of stumbled over it while I was checking some of my channel content and channel comments and something like this. I just recognized that there was some kind of a small kind of asterisk or something like this. And I was really surprised to learn that the video was flagged with 2 copyright IDs. So basically, a copyright ID is not a very critical thing. It's not a copyright claim. It is just some kind of information that somebody is not really happy about what you have done. And the strange thing is that those copyright IDs were linked to Datadog, and Datadog is basically the kind of the label, the distributor of the dub card and other content. And I was really a bit surprised and upset because we are, well, let's say, connected over Twitter, for example, and I thought if Datadog is having some problems with showing their content in my videos, they would simply contact me over Twitter, and then we could just figure out what we can do. And to see those 2 copyright IDs on the video was indeed a bit surprising. And as a very first reaction, I took the video offline, because the thing is that if you browse YouTube content for information about copyright IDs, is that there are several, let's say, ways to handle this. And what I've learned so far is that YouTube has kind of enabled monetization on this video, and they wanted to share the income to Datadog, for example. And the thing is, I have no monetization on my videos at all, so I do not earn a single cent over YouTube. And if you have followed my channel over the last months or years, you may know that I spend much more money for producing the videos than I ever going to earn over YouTube. And so I was really a bit upset. So I took the video offline, and I created a kind of a re-edit version of it, and I removed the Datadog parts, or the dub card parts at all, and re-uploaded the video just to be on the safe side. And during the next days, I have received a couple of comments to this new video, and learned that Datadog wasn't even aware about this at all. And so I got in contact with them on Twitter, and we had some kind of a small, short chit chat. And it looks like that they really don't know what happened at all, and they do not have a problem showing their content in my videos for a certain extent, which we haven't clarified so far. But anyway, so it is very, very strange what happened here, and it is, I think, another example that YouTube is going some strange ways, and that there is indeed some kind of a gap between the content creator and the communication and all those things YouTube is doing with those videos. And well, basically it looks like it's not really a problem now, but actually I'm a little bit unsure whether I'm going to set the first video back to public, because I have no control. I have no idea what is going to happen with this video, if there is going to be some advertising or something like this. And this is indeed a very strange situation. If you have some content on your YouTube channel and YouTube decides to add some advertising to this without even informing you, and you have no control over those advertising stuff, then it feels not very comfortable, at least for me. I don't know. Anyway, so I think for the next time when I'm going to test some sound, songs, titles, demos, whatever, I may have to pay attention that I'm just going to present a short section of it so that I do not run into the same problem again. And perhaps for products like the dub card or something like this, I may have to reach out to the creators upfront and ask for permission, which makes this whole video creation progress a little bit more complicated, a little bit more cumbersome, and may limit the, let's say, the variety of content presented in those videos a bit. And well, anyway, this is just for information purpose only. Basically, everything looks fine so far, and I'm still collecting some ideas and sample songs for testing the ARM2 set, so that we have something to compare and to listen to, and hopefully this is not going to create the next problem. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching, as usual. Feel free to subscribe, feel free to support me, and I will add the links to the mentioned topics and web pages into the description setting. Here it is again, section. And feel free to use the comment section if you have any questions, if you have any recommendations, suggestions, whatever, if you want to test me something on the Ultimate64 especially, and then I will try to squeeze this into my kind of video planning or whatever you want to call this. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you for the next episode. Bye bye.